This is a great discussion with Dr. Tim Rarick on fathers, or more precisely, fatherlessness. The repercussions for children and families are widespread for boys and especially maybe for girls. Numerous studies show that girls struggle with no father or an absent father in the home. A number of these issues show up as children, but even as adults. There's a lot of information here I think you'll enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Cardio Miracle. This is the supplement I take every day, 3 times a day. They offer a 90-day money-back guarantee. Give it a try, test your labs, and see if it doesn't work for you. You go to cwicmedia.com, that's CWICmedia.com, scroll to the bottom, hit the video, and find out more. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring on Dr. Tim Rarick, who is a PhD and professor at BYU, Idaho in family studies and child development. And he also serves on the board of health and welfare for the state of Idaho. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to talk about fatherlessness, its effect on the family, on society in the United States. Let me start off with this here. You have talked about fatherlessness and toxic masculinity. I wanted to get this one touched on first. What are the connections between a toxic masculinity and fatherlessness in a family?
Well, I guess, one of the things you have to kind of define is to say, okay, how do you define toxic? And there's kind of a universal definition. For me, toxic masculinity is the natural masculine tendencies that males typically have more than females, that tend to focus on the self and tend to demean things that are the feminine. More female tend to see women as objects to be used. Anger is a good thing. Sadness is a bad thing. Don't express emotion unless it's anger. Tends to use maybe their strength or their power to get what they want. And even sadly is blind to a lot of the list I just gave you. Mm-hmm. Is not even aware that they're doing that. And if they are aware of it, maybe dismisses it or not honest with themselves about it. Also hypermasculine tendencies such as feeling like that they have to always have the best position and professionally and the highest paid job and the biggest muscles and things that aren't necessarily bad, but the motives behind it and finding their worth and their value in domination and being very stoic and not showing a whole lot of emotion. So anyhow, I could probably keep going on, but that's how I would define some of toxic masculinity. The connection of fathers for sons particularly is that fathers, according to the research, fathers set the tone for how one researcher said that going from girl to womanhood is much more natural than going from boy to manhood. That if boys do not have markers and guidance, particularly from their fathers, on how to channel their natural masculine aggression and tendencies, and some males just aren't that masculine, but I'm talking about on average and for the most part, fathers are the best models for doing that. So when a son sees their dad deal with frustration and difficulty and, well, you could use scriptural terms, trials and tribulations. When a boy sees his dad deal with those things patiently and learns how to, and maybe even struggles with his marriage with his own mom, and when they're having struggles and disagreements, when he sees his dad learn how to be patient and channel his anger or maybe control his anger, and then maybe use that when he is aggressive to use it for good. When sons see their dad do that, that teaches volumes more than any sort of sermon a dad could give. So when fatherlessness is rampant, which it is in our country and many other countries throughout the world, you have a lot of boys who do not have that guidance going into manhood and especially into fatherhood. And then they're less likely to treat, according to the research, women with girls in respect. They're less likely to share equally in family responsibilities if they do have a family, which is why you see a lot of fatherless boys tend to have children out of wedlock. That's part of being a responsible man. They have they're less likely to have healthy views of masculinity and what it means to be a man. Boys are more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol if they don't have a male father. And gangs are a big one. Gangs become almost like a bunch of father figures. It's almost like becomes their own family. And so you see prisons as being holding cells mostly for fatherless boys. And people can attribute it just to poverty or to many other social trends, which are factors that matter. But fathers seem to have the largest impact on a son channeling his masculinity or developing it in a healthy way and not being toxic. Anyhow, that's just a little snapshot of some of the research on that.
Yeah, so a couple things on that. First of all, I just to distinguish that from kind of where society seems to be going right now in terms of masculinity as a whole, it's all viewed as toxic in many ways. It's right. It's like all masculinity is toxic. Toxic masculinity is used as kind of an umbrella or catch-all phrase for men. So I want to make sure we're distinguishing that. I think you did that well in kind of describing what toxic masculinity is. The next thing, though, is there's also a push in society, a real push against marriage and against men being involved sometimes with the family, which is very odd to me, right? It's I don't need a man, right? You brought up in one article I saw, Kate Perry saying, I don't need a dude. And it's like Katy Perry, right? Yet when you look at all of the data and you're just starting to describe some of the issues we're going to talk about here, why would you do that? Why would you do that for the kids? Why would a woman plan on being a single mother to begin with? And I brought this up before, but I was at a college graduation of my daughter a few years ago, and there was a group of girls that were right next to us after the graduation ceremony, and they're talking about their future, and one of the girls, after they had talked about how one of them had a boyfriend and they wanted to get married to him, and she just came right out and said, I don't need a man. That was her exact words, which is a regurgitated phrase, but she said, I don't need a man. When I want to have kids, I can have artificial insemination. I can do whatever technology allows me to do all these things. But I'm just not planning on having a man. And I just thought, number one, where are you getting that from? Who's telling you that apart from society as a whole? And number two, do you understand the repercussions of that? Not just for your kids, but for your own possible happiness, I would say.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. They don't understand where that will lead. A lot of people have these strong positions and ideas, and they don't realize what the repercussions are going to be. I call them uninformed voters. And people we all live in ignorance. And the goal is to how much can I reduce ignorance and make sure that the decisions I'm making and the positions that I have are based in objective science, objective philosophy, and an objective truth and doctrine. And the scary thing is when you're certain, I'm going to, pardon me for quoting a Marvel movie, but which actually has some role in playing in socializing us and having some of the beliefs and positions.
Sure.
But in I think it's Captain America Civil War. He's dialoguing. Spider-Man is introduced for the first time. The new Spider-Man is introduced for the first time, and he's dialoguing with Captain America. And Steve Rogers says, "What did Tony tell you?" Meaning, what did Iron Man tell you? And Spider-Man says, "Did you think you're right? And you're wrong, but you think you're right, and that makes you dangerous." And I think that's one of the most toxic things and one of the most debilitating things for an individual and for society. So this girl who says, I don't need a man, thinking that she's right and not even questioning that premise or that position, that maybe this has some negative repercussions, not just for the future children, not just for society, but as you said, Greg, for herself. So that's my little preamble to what I'm about to say. And that is, I think in the name of, there's three main ethics. And if you read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, he's quoting other researchers. He gives, and my students in one of my classes, I make them read at least part of The Righteous Mind, so they can understand the moral roots of liberals and conservatives and libertarians and where it comes from. But he gives 3 ethics, and when I speak at the UN, I often share these ethics so I can try to help the different countries to say, look, some of your countries are focused on 1, 2, or even all 3 of these. In our Western world, especially the United States, we are primarily focused on ethic of autonomy. The other 2 are ethic of community and ethic of divinity. So ethic of autonomy is that you kind of become your personal freedom is the most important thing. It's based on the idea that I'm first and foremost an autonomous or free individual with wants, needs, and preferences, and I should be free to satisfy those wants, needs, and preferences as I see fit. And that's the dominant ethic in the US and Canada, and especially Western Europe. The other 2 ethics, though, one of them is ethic of community, which Haidt discovers through personal experience, not just through intellectual study, but when he moves to Orissa and lives in the Middle East. Ethic of community is based on the idea, again, first and foremost, that we're members of larger entities, such as families, what we're talking about, teams, tribes, armies, companies. And under this ethic, people have an obligation to play their assigned roles. So which is why some communities develop moral concepts such as duty, responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And the divinity one, that doesn't just mean God, but they have some sort of God. It could be nature. It could be, and God's called by a variety of names from a variety of religions. But it's that we're not just bodies. We're temporary vessels in which a divine soul has been implanted, and that we acknowledge a higher power. So in the United States, we become so ethic of autonomy, and this is what I tell countries at the UN and delegates. We become so ethic of autonomy that it's actually to our own demise. If it's not balanced by all 3, then you'll hear people say, well, I don't need a man, because they feel empowered by doing something on their own steam. And I'm a fan of empowering women. When I go to the UN, especially the Commission on the Status of Women, and I have 3 daughters myself, I have 4 sisters. I'm a big believer in women's rights, gender equality, and women empowerment. But to be so focused on ethic of autonomy and telling a woman or a girl that she's empowered by dismissing men and doing things on her own way and on her own strength actually hurts her and everyone else. And I really think, Greg, that a big part of this is coming in the name of empowerment to show, look, you can do this on your own. And maybe you can, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And do what? Anybody can, not anyone, but just getting pregnant and giving birth to a child and sort of providing 3 square meals and a roof isn't sufficient for human flourishing. And a myriad of problems can come from that. So you're right. We're getting it from society. But I mentioned Marvel movies. There's a lot of social media and entertainment media that teach that empowerment comes from, ironically, becoming more masculine while you're trying to fight masculinity, becoming more masculine. But It also means that I do not need men, because men are the problem. And if we can do this on our own steam, then it shows how strong we are. And I think it gets it backwards. And honestly, when men say the same thing as I don't need women and I can do this on my own, we're back to the toxic masculinity and this ethic of autonomy when it pervades everything. I'm going to quote another movie, which is under Disney. Pixar, Incredibles 1. If everybody's super, nobody is. And what I found in the countries, and especially our country, when we're so focused on autonomy, if everybody gets what they want, and if everybody's autonomous, nobody is. There's no way you can satisfy every single want and need and also still have some sort of community and responsibility and duty, because then you just have, what did Haidt say? He said, the more autonomous you are focused on that ethic, the more you see the world as a bunch of separate objects rather than in relationships. And so if that's my lens I'm viewing the world through, then it makes sense to me why I might hear a girl say, I don't need guys, because I can do it my own thing.
Yeah, it's also divisive. I mean, it's just it's designed to be divisive, and unfortunately, we seem to be going further and further down that path. Yeah, well, let me ask you right now. I mean, you do a lot of work there at the UN. Are we reversing any of this? Is this becoming more and more of a snowball that is just growing and growing and being these ideas are being promulgated throughout the world?
The answer is yes to both, which sounds contradictory. So to the negative side, I would call it the anti-family, like you do your own thing, the divisiveness, the polarization, the family breakdown. That is getting stronger in some regard. And again, that's been going on for a very long time at the UN and in a lot of Western countries. And again, because of this ethic of autonomy and in the name of freedom. But I have also seen for the last 10 years, the pro-family, depending on how you want to define that, but people who believe that the family really is the fundamental unit of the society rather than the individual. I've seen more and more men and women rise up and speak against this and say, look, yes, we believe in autonomy, we believe in freedom, we believe in human rights, but not at the expense of healthy, functioning societies that are sustainable. So I have seen major pushback. I've seen delegates speak up who hadn't spoken up before. I've seen more non-governmental organizations be created. I've seen a Big Ocean Women, which is an example of an NGO that's just come on since I've been going to the UN, and I forgot what they call themselves. Some brand of feminism, and it's a rebranding of the second, third, and fourth wave feminism.
You're talking about the Utah group, right?
Yeah. Carolina Allen. In fact, I remember the first time she went there, I was there with her. She said, I have this idea for an NGO. They've got a large group of women who are like, I guess they call them feminist moms, or I don't know. You have to be careful how you use some of these terms because they can be misconstrued a whole variety of ways. But they're just an example of many men and women who've risen up and decided to speak up and say, oh, we're not going to take this anymore. And there are actually multiple perspectives. I'll give you a quick example. My wife is very introverted. She does not like to be in the public eye. She doesn't, but she likes people. She went with me to the UN once, and we attended this event that was called What Women Want. This is probably 2016. What Women Want. And it was this panelists of men, but mostly women, who are saying, this is what women want. And it was all about getting out of the home. The home is a prison cell. Marriage is a torture chamber. And the reality is, in some countries and in subcultures, that is the case. Mm-hmm. But to project that and to say that represent 8 billion people on the planet, and that actually is, and so therefore to create this caricature, this is how it is in every country. And therefore, it's almost like creating a semi-straw man argument and then beating up the straw man and say, look what we've won. So that's what it was. It was all about, this is what and by the way, this is what women want. They want freedom. They want liberation from children. They want liberation from marriage, and they want more pay. They want to be in Fortune 500 companies. All the things. This external validation, which is not really empowering. You can never empower somebody from the outside in, men or women. So that's what it was all about. During the Q&A session, my wife, who doesn't speak up at anything, she raises her hand. And she said, you've probably heard the phrase, by the way, she raises her hand. I thought to myself, oh, do not raise your hand. I do not want them attacking my wife. This protective instinct, don't attack her. I know what some of these people are going to say, and they're going to go after you. Well, my wife so boldly but calmly said, you've heard the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the panelists are like, yeah. Well, it seems like we're hearing one squeaky wheel, but there's 3 other wheels on this vehicle. And here's what I want as a woman. And she talks about motherhood and how she chooses to be a mom, and that being a wife is empowering, and how she loves. Anyhow, she said all these things, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I cannot believe she said that so boldly. So how are you going to get what all women want rather than what you think women want through this very narrow lens? And I saw this cascade of hands go up after that. And woman after woman would say, yeah, what she just said. I totally agree with that. But it took someone to break the silence. And so I guess I'm using that as a microcosm of saying, the anti-family powers have been emboldened, but I've also seen the pro-family powers speak up, and it's giving more voice because, man, I'm quoting a lot of movies. The Pixar movie, Bug's Life. If you let one ant stand up to us, they will all stand up. Those ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure it out, there goes our way of life. And I've seen that happen at the UN, that it's not about us winning so much? Is it us about, to quote Elder Maxwell, giving people a choice and leaving them with the truth? Because if you're only given one perspective, you can't make an informed decision. And then they can't make, really, agency is limited when you're only limited to one or two ideas. So I've seen more pro-family ideas have a voice and make some inroads. Anyhow, so that's a long answer to a very good question.
No, that's a great answer. By the way, the big ocean women, it's maternal femininity or feminism. Maternal feminism is their phrase.
Maternal feminism.
Yeah. So,
okay.
But anyway, yeah, I've met a couple of those women there that put that together. All right. Hookup culture. How is fatherlessness? How does that affect what we call hookup culture today? Why would that matter?
Well, I guess I'm going to go back to defining hookup culture. It's generally spoken as two people getting together to have sexual intimacy devoid of emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, and especially spiritual intimacy. So I view intimacy, and other researchers have defined it this way, as more holistic. You got 4 domains: spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical. The hookup culture is solely physical. It's devoid of commitment, and it's about physically hooking up with each other. And maybe you hook up for multiple occasions of intercourse. Maybe it's just a one-night stand, but it's very pervasive on college campuses. And actually, from what I've seen in the literature, is that it's college students think it is happening, like everyone's hooking up all the time, when the reality is they're not hooking it up nearly as much as the perception. And so what that does, that perception breeds more of the same. And so there's this pressure from college students, even at BYU Idaho, which I call there's a diet version of the hookup culture, and then we call them NCMOs, non-committal makeups.
Yes.
So I call it the diet version.
Yes, I haven't heard
it comes from the same philosophy. So it comes from the same philosophy of physical intimacy devoid of the other 3 domains of intimacy and lacking commitment. So hookup culture, and it's really broken down quite well in Mark Regnerus's book called Cheap Sex, and he's a researcher out of University of Texas, Austin, brilliant sociologist, and he writes about it so well. And one of the things I love about a book, when they write on social, family, marriage, and dating issues, or just any of those issues, is when you can't totally tell where ideologically and politically where they stand. They're just sharing what we know, and they help you draw your own conclusions rather than just, preaching at you, because I feel like you convince more people that way when you just preach to the choir, even though the choir gets out of tune, and that's necessary sometimes. But his book, the subtitle is I think it's The Breakdown of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy. And he talks about the hookup culture being just like we view sex more or less as something that everybody should be able to have, and the social structures and barriers in place that would and the social norms that used to exist that would encourage commitment and encourage the other types of intimacy where you actually get to know someone, you care about them beyond just using their bodies for your own pleasure. Those things have eroded over the years, and now there's really no incentive for women and especially men to stick around. So how does fatherlessness play into that? Well, I've talked about how fathers impact on boys, fathers impact on girls. The research is finding again and again that fathers are basically the entry point into the male species for the daughters. So he sets the tone for all future male relationships. She starts to figure out what it means to be a man from her dad's perspective, and what boys want, what they think about, and how they should treat women. He sets the tone for what she feels like she can expect and deserve in men. So the first, and I think I wrote an article on this, but the father is the first and most important and most influential love in a girl's life. And so fatherless daughters are much more likely to, they're going to start puberty earlier. They're going to have sexual intercourse earlier. They're going to have multiple sexual partners throughout their life. Again, compared to daughters who have involved fathers. Of course, there's always exceptions to this. There's always girls who have loving, involved fathers. who break this norm, but on average and for the most part, girls who are raised in father absent homes, or father who are emotionally absent too and physically there, they're more likely to have more sex, and they're more likely to allow themselves to be exploited by men, because they see that this is what men want. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I did my own informal kind of qualitative analysis of stories of women who were in the porn industry, and they were actresses in the porn industry, strippers, prostitutes, and that they got out. They were part of this nonprofit that helped them get out of this situation of this sexual exploitation. And again, I read quotes. In fact, I think I have a quote right here. Let me see if I can pull it up. One woman said, "I loved the attention from everyone, but now I look back, it's not the kind of attention I needed. But I was young, naive, and motivated by the money and the fame. It was easy for an male agent, to take advantage of me. For so many years," and another one, "I felt like that no one could truly love me." Another one, "I was going to get the attention I always loved and wanted. I loved and craved attention. I was desperate for love. This always gets me. I wanted a father so much." And so the lesser version of maybe the porn industry would be the hookup culture. I'm not saying they're the exact same thing. However, pornography fuels the hookup culture. The hookup culture, or you could say sexual exploitation, fuels pornography. The two things feed off each other. So fatherlessness plays an integral role in this, because if a woman feels empowered from the inside out by her father, and she has this father hole in her heart. In fact, there's this book called Father Need that talks about this. I believe every child is born with a spot in their heart that's shaped like a mom and a dad, and mom and dad need to fill that in. And if dad, for example, if the daughters are not filling that in, that doesn't go away. She craves male attention, and she will get it in whatever way she can. And often they don't even realize that that's why they're doing it. So a lot of these girls that I'd studied, and again, this is more in the porn industry, had talked about how much they loved the attention from men. One woman I spoke with said, when I wondered after, and this is after she got out, it was more retrospect. She said, "I wondered when I danced for men, and I got the attention, that if I would have had the same thoughts and feelings, if my dad would have paid attention to me when I was wearing a dress, and sorry, this is really getting me.
It's all right. It's all right.
When I wore a dress and I was a younger girl and paid attention to me and loved me." So fathers really do set such an incredible tone for how the girls see themselves, how the girls see men and their value and worth. And I really strongly believe, and this is not just me, but the evidence is showing that hookup culture is fueling a lot of this, because people are trying to seek attention. And when your primary, and Erica talked about this, I think, on one of your previous podcasts, and Erica and I have talked, kind of nerded out on this a bit, but that first attachment with mother and father, that again, if that doesn't go away, we still try to bond and attach, usually in toxic and unhealthy ways, even if we are ignorant to it.
So, it's fascinating where you're now saying then that because I think this goes to everything you're saying here, but the biology of a girl that is going to go through puberty is affected by the socialization in her family, right? That is really something. And this is, the first time I heard this, it was from, I think it was Jordan Peterson about a year ago. And I was like, what? And it's the girls actually enter puberty earlier when they don't have a father in the home, or don't have the fatherly, someone around them that's their father around them. How is that possible? Number one. And number two, what do you think that means?
Well, there's a few different explanations for it. One of them is the most commonly used one is the evolutionary psychology explanation. And that is, from the evolutionary psychology perspective, the perpetuation of the species and survival of the fittest. Our ancestors, we've evolved over time to be able to, pass on the best genes and to be able to survive and have our prosperity survive, or posterity, sorry. posterity, man, goodness,
There you
posterity survive. And so a lot of researchers will say that the female's body, when it senses threat from the environment, we're not going to be able to perpetuate our species, and they feel unsafe and uncared for, that naturally the biology kicks in. We better start to be able to reproduce soon, and it's not like the woman's thinking this or the female body is even thinking this.
Sure.
It's more of an evolutionary response. So when the father isn't around to offer that protection and that reassurance, there seems to be a stress response that the body starts to menarche occurs sooner. That's the onset of puberty, the first menstrual cycle, and it kicks in sooner. That's the evolutionary perspective to say, okay, now we've got to, we do not have a father figure, a male father figure, obviously, to protect us. So we need to be able to get ready to reproduce and move on sooner with this. So that's the evolutionary explanation for it. And I was talking with a woman, I think it was Kazakhstan, at the UN once. I was speaking at an event. I was talking about father-daughter relationships. She's lesbian. She comes up, she talks about her and her partner who have a daughter. And she said, well, what does this mean for my girl? And she was really being sincere. She wasn't trying to be argumentative or anything. And I said, I bet you love your daughter very much, you and your partner. She said, oh, yes, very much. And I said, I bet you're phenomenal caretakers for her, like mothers. But according to the research, your daughter is going to need a father figure. And I don't care how masculine the female is, or if you put 50 females to take care of that girl, she needs a father figure. You can pretend to be a father figure. So I advised her to find a brother or someone that they know that is a very trusted male that could be a father figure in her girl's life, because my job isn't to break up their family. At that point, it's not my stewardship. Sure. You got to learn when to stay in your lane. But the research is showing over and over again that it has to do with the male father, not two caretakers that have an impact on the onset of puberty and menarche and sexual activity. So I don't remember what your other question was, but I hope I got you.
Well, you were saying how it might have happened and what does it mean? I guess is what I was saying. What does that mean?
Yeah. So what that means is, I guess for the girl, what that means is that she is again more likely to have sexual activity and find her worth in getting male's attention and sexual activity, or perhaps using her body to get attention, and thinking that, now I'm worth something. And if you replicate that thousands, if not million times over, what does that mean for society? Well, you're probably going to have a lot more girls who don't realize, who don't realize what they're worth, who don't understand the purpose of sex, who see marriage as kind of what we talked about earlier, is something that's restrictive to their autonomy and their freedom. And there's plenty of men, sadly, out there, who are happy to pick up those pieces and to use the women who have that particular philosophy.
Yes.
So you see you're going to see a lot less marriage. You're going to see a lot less involved fathers, because now what that means is that you're going to create a vicious cycle where a girl who has an uninvolved father is 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen than a girl who has an involved father.
Wow.
So 7 times more likely. What does that mean for poverty rates? What does that mean for marriage rates? What does that mean for abortion rates? And what does that mean for just the economy in general? So there's a lot of domino effect there, or ripple effect, if you will.
Okay. Now this is interesting also. It says that that also there is better marital quality with these women when they have later puberty development. What is that more of a cause and effect thing? Are we getting correlation mixed up in there at all? And it's just a matter of, well, because they didn't have a father involved, therefore they had early puberty development, and also their marital quality is lower. Does the actual early puberty actually have specifically an effect on their marital quality later on?
Well, I don't know if it's the early puberty that has and this is just my interpretation of the research, but I don't know if it's the earlier puberty that's the problem. It's that earlier puberty means now your physical body is outpacing your neurological development. And so prefrontal cortex is massively under construction in toddlerhood, and then again in adolescence, which is why you see them make a lot of impulsive, short-sighted decisions. One of the things I do on the side is I coach tennis for the local high school here, and I'm trying to teach them about their brains because they'll always go for the money shot. They're always going to try to hit the winner, even when it's the stupidest time to do it. And tennis is about strategy and knowing when to pull the trigger and when not to. Teenagers have a hard time doing that. So they really need some guidance and some nurturing to help them. It's been called that the prefrontal cortex is the parent in the room. and teenagers really need to have that. So if you've got a girl whose biological development is outpacing her neurological development, and I would also say even her social development, she is a lot more attractive to boys because she's developing physical attributes that are attractive to boys and to young men. And if she already has the lack of self-worth and self-esteem and insecurity because there is no father figure around to help fill that and to meet that need and that attachment, then she is more likely to have more sexual activity, more likely, again, to allow herself to either use others or allow herself to be used. And more likely, it shows, to also have I call it the toxic spectrum of trust, where you either mistrust and demean all that is male and masculine. And there's been a couple studies on that, where it says that perhaps some radical feminists who hate men, one of the contributing factors was a terrible experience with their own father. Not the only factor, but that's one of the contributing factors. So I wouldn't just say, oh, you have early puberty, so therefore you're going to have poor marital quality. It's more of a cascade of like the domino effect. Now they're having more sexual activity. They're less likely to know how to bond with men. And if research shows that more sexual activity before marriage leads to more marital instability and more likely to have divorce, less marital satisfaction. So I would say it's a myriad of factors or ingredients contributing to the casserole that is marital breakdown, if that makes sense. And one of them we know is the early onset of puberty, but that's also because the father, what the impact he's having on the biological development, the social and emotional development, and the attachment with male relationships. And so it just kind of sets the stage, which sounds so fatalistic, but I've seen many women and men who have overcome fatherlessness, which if you want to talk about that later, we can.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's always agency. There's always effort. There's always prayer. There's always opportunities to do those things. So there's an explosion in mental health illness throughout the youth and young adults, especially with women. How much of this might be correlated with fatherlessness to begin with? Because that's certainly increasing. I've got numbers here I can go over later, but the number of children now that are born out of wedlock, just it was consistent for a while, actually dipped a little bit, but it's now increasing again. Mm-hmm. Is there a correlation to this? We've got a breakdown of, let's call it the breakdown of the family. Is there's mental health? Is some of that at least a direct result of fatherlessness?
Absolutely. So studies on eating disorders, fatherless girls are much, much more likely at risk of developing an eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia. There's multiple studies on the impact on self-esteem. What is an eating disorder? It's a mental illness, and it's not disordered eating is the symptom, but there's an internal neurological and attachment issue there where perhaps they're mental illness is, by definition, is that you see reality in a particular way that is not reality, but your mind thinks that it is. So, for example, someone who's depressed might say to them, "So I'm such a terrible person, I'll never amount to anything. I suck at everything." Well, if somebody never learns to really challenge those beliefs, what cognitive psychologists would call self-defeating beliefs, and you just believe that, you inhabit that, then that's why it's a mental illness, because you're believing something that's not true, and it's self-defeating. Fathers play an integral role in sons and daughters, but particularly daughters, like I said, with self-esteem, with eating disorders, anxiety, depression. Yes, smartphones, social media, and entertainment media are all playing a significant role in that. But what I like to ask is, how can we put those two factors together? What role do fathers play in helping their daughters regulate their social media intake, to regulate their smartphone use? Fathers, here's some things that fathers tend to do different than mom. According to research, and I use the spoon and fork analogy. So there's a term in child development called difference equals deficit error, meaning it's an errored way of thinking to think just because there's a difference, somebody has a deficit. And that's what our society wants to do. It wants to put men and women against each other. I mean, if I could paraphrase, was it 3 Nephi 11:29? Contention is not of me, but is of the devil. For he stirs up the hearts of men to contend with anger one against another. I like to add, he stirreth up the hearts of men and women to contend with anger one with another. And you'll see these strong movements to try to, whether it's promote gender equality or to empower somebody, and it's an us versus them mentality. And it is not empowering at all. So when we talk about how moms and dads are different, I always get a little bit, I guess I have to give a lot of disclaimers, and I don't think we should have to say, look, spoon and fork are different, but they both feed a person and they serve different functions. If I'm having yogurt, I want a spoon. If I'm having grilled chicken, I want a fork. They both can feed me. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other. So in this case, fathers have had a greater impact on mothers when it comes to their children. They're more likely to discourage children from whining and feeling sorry for themselves. Of course, that's going to be taken to a toxic level where they're constantly correcting and demeaning their children. But there is some significant value, and I've even found in my own marriage, my own family, that I'm much more likely to discourage that. Moms are more likely to empathize and connect with the emotion, which is extremely empowering, and dads need to learn how to do that. But there is just as much value to discourage children from whining, not in a demeaning way, but to help them understand, look, Layman, look, Lemuel, how's that going for you? Has that done anything for you? I'm more likely to say that to my children. I have a couple of my children that seem to just go straight to murmuring about things. And we've had a lot of conversations. They know I care about their feelings, and I try to, connect first before I correct. And I try not to correct all the time. But when I do, I try to help them say, how's that going for you? Has that whining led to anything? I said, when I complain, and I do sometimes, it's never really solved anything. That's another thing. Dads are more likely to focus on solving problems instead of complaining. They're more likely to encourage independence and self-reliance. They're more likely to ask questions regarding where, why, and what, even for children at a young age. And it used to be believed that dads just do not know how to talk to young children. But research is finding that actually moves cognitive development in a very unique way. They're more likely to teach children than moms to teach how to take responsibility for their mistakes. And they're also more likely to try to protect them from the outside world while getting them to take risks. So risk taking is enormously important if it's done in a healthy way and in a measured way. What the heck does that have to do? You may be going, Greg, what does that have to do with anything? Well, if you have an involved father who has a loving and communicated relationship with their daughter, that is up to date on how screens and social media and entertainment media are impacting not just adults, but impacting children, particularly maybe the young female brain. The father can use those natural tendencies he has, if again, natural to use good, to be more protective and say, you know what? Maybe we should get you a smartphone at a later age with heavy restrictions. And if you can take more of a maybe like a family council perspective where we counsel together, and you sit down with your daughter once in a while and say, hey, and they like for example, my daughter said, can I have Instagram? We said no for the longest time, but we taught her why. And we tried to help her understand that why very significantly. But dads are more likely than moms. And moms, by the way, moms do have a protective instinct, and moms do offer correction, and they do discourage whining. I've just seen in the research and in I guess anecdotally, that fathers have a great regulatory capacity to stop crap from coming into the home, especially if he's aware of it. There's some men out there who are completely oblivious and they're not using the abilities that they have. Mm-hmm. But if a dad's involved in his daughter's life, she will feel safe. She'll feel less likely to want to bond with things on social media and get her self-worth and her attention to that. And the dad's more likely to put those restrictions and those fences around, and then to maybe expand those fences as developmentally appropriate. So yeah, I think there's a strong correlative factor here between mental health, social, or should we just say screen media, and involved fathers. Sorry, that was kind of a long way to get there, but I wanted to lay the background on it.
No, that's good. Good. I'm wondering if you can explain some statistics to me and see what your interpretation of this is. And I've seen this from a couple of different studies, but right now, 70% of all divorces are initiated by women. 90% of divorces with a college-educated woman are initiated by the woman. Yet, among parents that are 26 to 31, so we're talking younger here where maybe those divorces haven't happened yet, but who did not graduate from college, 70% of the mothers and 70% of the fathers had at least one child outside of marriage, and 81% of those births reported by women and 87% of those reported by men had occurred to non-college graduates. So there's a larger out of wedlock birth rate among non-college educated individuals, but there's a much higher divorce rate, especially from women, but overall even from women that are college educated. It almost seems like a disparity there in terms of people that keep order and sacrifice and are altruistic. Why would those numbers be different?
So why is there such it seems contradictory evidence between college, or the lack of education, and out of wedlock births? Mm-hmm. And then the other one is the divorce rate amongst college educated.
Yes.
Well, I guess my interpretation for the college educated divorce rate is, well, first of all, I think college educated or not, obviously you read the statistics that women are more likely to initiate divorce than men. There are some things that women are attuned to much, much more in relationships than men are about that relationship. And it usually has to do with emotional intimacy and emotional needs. But why that statistic goes up amongst college educated women? Well, I think there's at least two ways you can look at it. One of them, you can interpret it and say, well, it's because they went to college and they realized they don't have to put up with crap from men, and they've been brainwashed into thinking you need a man to be married to feel empowered and provide for you. And so once they get college educated, they get out of that prison cell. Another possible way to look at it is because they're being taught that, they're not being taught things in college. And sadly enough, even in the social sciences and in my field, they're not being taught things that are about commitment and about sacrifice and about holistic intimacy rather than just one area of intimacy. And they're being told so many things about their freedom and their rights and their empowerment. And they deserve rights, they deserve freedom, they deserve empowerment, but not in the ways that are solely from ethic of autonomy, because it actually doesn't help them in the long run. So I think there's two ways to interpret that. And my interpretation would be more of the latter. They're being told that they don't need men and the patriarchy is the problem. The intersectionality theory of queer theory, gender theory, critical race theory, and there's multiple theories there. And I think you've talked about it before on your podcast. It is not favorable for men, and it's not favorable for commitment, and it's not favorable for marriage. And if that's what you're being taught, whether you're in the humanities, social science, or something else, and you come from maybe a family that's potentially either broken or you do not, maybe your parents are married, but they're really not that involved. They're more focused on just making money and providing the basics of life. If that's what you come from, and then you're being fed this through entertainment, social media, and then particularly from academics who have PhDs and seem extremely wise and intelligent, why wouldn't you buy it hook, line, and sinker? And why wouldn't you start to see marriage as something that's terrible? But there are plenty of marriages that probably do need to end in divorce, and the woman is right to initiate it. But for every one of those, there's multiple that don't need to happen. Sadly, I know some in my own community. I know personally that didn't need to happen, and they do happen. And so I guess anyhow, the long and short of it is, I would say that's probably more the latter. That's how I would hypothesize.
Well, I think that the women in that if they're college educated, they're more likely also to have a career. They're lot more likely to have financial stability for themselves. So it's an easier process. They're not as dependent.
That's true. And those things aren't necessarily bad.
That probably has something to do with it. What's that?
Right. And sorry, I just kind of talked over you. That was my fault. And those things aren't necessarily bad. There's nothing wrong with women having a career and being able to provide for themselves. So it does make it easier. But I wouldn't say that's the primary cause for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Now go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to mention the education when it comes to out of wedlock childbearing. That's a tricky one, again, because we humans are multifaceted, and we're not. It's the hard sciences like engineering, physics. It's nice to have clean cut formulas where you can almost always get the same outcome if you put in the same input. And there are laws that govern human relationships and human development, but because of the X factor of autonomy or moral agency, it's hard to boil it down to like this is the factor or this is the variable. So there's a whole slew of things that could explain the out of wedlock child rate and lack of education. I know in other countries outside the U.S., I and a couple others published an article on for women in sub-Saharan Africa who, when their maternal education went up, the intimate partner violence went down. And it might be because they've learned that maybe there were some things in some of their subcultures where they live that were heavy on the patriarchy and were toxic masculinity reigned, and they just thought that was normal. And maybe in their education they got it, or maybe it was the education that facilitated them to get out of a particular toxic relationship. So, but there's a lot of people outside the U.S. who, when it comes to out of wedlock childbearing, I just think it's becomes, and also in the U.S., I know there's certain, particularly in inner cities, where that becomes the norm. I've talked to women who said that this is just like, it's normal for you to just have children. Like once you get to be a teen or a young adult, everybody in the neighborhood and in the city, that's just a normal thing. And if that's all you've known, it doesn't mean that it makes it right, but it makes it understandable. So a lack of education, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Is having a child young make it harder to get a college degree? Yes.
Sure.
So which one came first?
Sure. No, that's good.
Anyhow, there's other variables to explore there too.
Yeah. Tim, love the discussion. It sounds to me like there's a lot of other things I'd like to talk to you about maybe in a future interview. Really good stuff. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.